in this tutorial we're going to carry on looking at the titler or the title creation window in Premiere Pro and some of the options we've got to put text on a path and also to create shapes and organize those shapes. So if I want to create a new title, I can either go up here to the title menu, title, new title. I'd be creating a default still at this point, or alternatively I can go down to the new items icon at the bottom of my project panel and create a new title, or the keyboard shortcut is Control T, and I'm going to call this text on a path. So I'm going to click OK and the title creation window is brought forward. Now at first I can create text, point text that'll go straight across the screen. These two buttons down here, by the way, are for creating area text, but I showed you in a previous tutorial that to create area text you don't actually need to choose these buttons. You can just click and drag and that will create the area itself. So you don't actually need to click this button. It does the same job just by clicking and dragging. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that. So I've got some other options down here, and you'll see that we've got the font that I'm going to be using here. I might want to have a different font. Now, until I've started creating some text, I haven't really got the options to change my fonts very much. So at this point I really want to create some text on a path. Now you'll see here I've got some pen tool options, but I've also got these two buttons that say text on a path, both horizontally and vertically. Now if I click this and I haven't already created a path, you can obviously create one with the pen tool, but if you haven't created a path and you click text on a path, the first thing you actually get is the pen tool. Now if you single click and then single click again and single click again, you're going to get very straight lines, and Control Z a few times to get rid of those. However, if we reselect that tool and click and drag, you'll see that we get these things called Bezier Handles, and if I click and drag again, you'll see that I've got more Bezier Handles, and I'll just do one more. Now these Bezier Handles allow us to change the angle and the intensity of a slope. So if we look at this angle here, and we look at this Bezier handle that's associated with this point, if I go over the end of it, you'll see that I get a black arrow with a circle at the end, meaning that I'm going to change the Bezier handle when I click and drag. So if I click and pull it around, you can see that I can change the angle into this point quite considerably, but also I can make them shorter or longer. So if I click and make it shorter, you can see it's a much less intense point until the point where it just goes in normally. Whereas if I pull it right out, you can see I can make it a very intense sweep into this point. Now there is a kind of an unspoken rule about Bezier handles. It's not hard and fast. As with all rules, you have to work out whether you obey them or not. But the rule is this: you've got a length of line between this point and this point, and often these lines are referred to as splines. So I've got a section of spline between this point and this point, which is a certain length, and ideally you should make sure that the handles, the one coming out from this point and the one going into this point, don't exceed in their total length the length of the spline. So if I was, for instance, to pull this one right out until it kind of crossed over that one, obviously these two handles are now much longer than the spline. Sometimes it's exactly what you want, but as a general rule you don't really want to have splines too long. Now what if I want to add or get rid of a point? This is where these little tools here, if I click the delete anchor point, I can click on this one and it's gone. But if I then want to add a point, I can click on the add anchor point, click on the add anchor point button. Then if I want to actually move this one, obviously if I hover over it now I can just add another point. But if I go to my pen tool here and I click on that point, I can physically drag that point around to create the sort of shape that I like, and then I can still go to the end and get the same ability to be able to play around with these points however I want. Okay, so that's how we can create our splines, and we can create our Bezier handles that come out of these points and adjust them however we feel we want to adjust them. Now I used this tool here to do that, which was the path type tool, which means I was going to go on a horizontal path. If I click it again now that a path has been created, you'll see that I get the text tool once I come inside this box, and as soon as I click on there and I start to type, this is text on a path, you'll see clearly the text is on a path, and I can select all that text and I can go down to my styles down here and completely change them. Now obviously that's not going to fit, I need something a bit smaller. Well, it's all selected. I can reduce the font size until it's all actually on the path. Okay, so that's how we can create text on a path, and we can do it horizontally and vertically. I'm going to get rid of this just by simply selecting the arrow tool, making sure it's selected and hitting delete. Incidentally, you can see that once it's finished you don't see the path. The path is simply there for the text to follow. If you wanted to then underline the text, you'd need to come over here to the title properties page and look for the underline option, which is just here. And when you click the underline option, well, it may or it may not work quite the way you expect it to work. You can see there it's not quite done what I was hoping it was going to do. So I can't guarantee that underlining will always do exactly what you like. Anyway, I'm going to get rid of that box, just select it and hit delete, and show you that there are some other tools down here for creating shapes. So if I want to create a lower third is basically if you split the screen into 3 equal sections, you'd have a line about here and you'd have a line about here. So you'd have one section here, one in the middle and one at the bottom. You would put your title on the bottom third, or if somebody was actually full of action down here, you could put it on a top third. It's all to do with focus. We tend to split screens into 3 and put action on thirds. So this seagull here is pretty much on a third, so it's almost a perfect place for an action shot. To have it absolutely ideal, you pretty much want it here, where a third going this way and a third going this way would intersect with each other. So a lower third. So let's look at this particular tool here, which is a rounded rectangle tool. If I select the rounded rectangle tool and start outside my box and start to pull in, you can see that it's using the properties of the last selected item, which happened to be this title style down here. Now we created a title style before, which was this one at the bottom. If I click on that one, I can actually use a previous title style, and I can then go in and modify it however I like, in exactly the same way that we modified previous ones. So we've got a stroke here, an outer stroke, and it's black. I don't really want it to be black. I'd like it to be, let's say, a slightly, well, let's show you something quite clear so you can see the difference. Like make it a green. So the stroke's now green, and I can decide the size of the stroke. 10 might be too big. Let's take it down to 3. So a nice thin stroke. If I want to make it a bit bigger, I can just go in here and I can pull this up and down, and I can physically shift the whole thing around as I like. I might pull it over so that it's square at this end and got a rounded end this side. And I probably would want to turn the opacity down because it's a little bit too obvious for me. So I would probably go down to where it says opacity here under the fill, and I can turn the opacity down. Now note that's changing just the opacity of the fill, not of the stroke. I also need to come down to my stroke and turn its opacity down as well if I want to match it, or alternatively I can leave that at 100% so that when I turn it down, the thing that's most obvious is the stroke. So you can play around with all these kinds of things to create a lower third. And then if I want to add text, I can go up to the text tool here and I can click in here and I can go lower third, and again it's using the same bits and pieces that the previous one had. I can select all of those and I can again reduce the font size to make it fit, and I can change. Let's choose something else from our title styles just to show you. Let's choose, say, this one here. So it's lower third, and again I need to reduce the font of that even further. And then to place it, go up to my arrow tool and I can pull it down and try and place it roughly where I want it to be. Now that might not be very precise. If I want it to be precise, I need to select both my title and then holding my shift key the background as well. Now they're both selected, you'll see that I've got an align panel come to life, and I want to align them both horizontally, and if I want to I can align them vertically as well, so it's in the middle absolutely. Now if it's not quite in the right place for me, I can deselect them both and select just the text itself. Then using my arrow keys I can nudge it sideways. If you do shift, you can take it in increments of 5 pixels. Non-shift is just moving it 1 pixel at a time, but shift will move it increments of 5, I believe, possibly 10, but moving it along. So if you want to place it precisely, you can just use your arrow tools to move things up or move things down, left or right, just to get it fixed exactly where you want it to be. And then we've created a lower third. And if I like that lower third, bear in mind I can go back up to my templates option, and I can go to my user templates, and I can go to this flyout menu that says import current title as a template, and I can call it my lower third example. Click OK, And now that lower third example is brought into my templates and available for me to use whenever I want. I can click OK. And of course remember that we do have the option to export this to go to another project if we wish any time. The only other thing to say is you do get a few more tools such as rotate. So if you actually wanted to rotate something, you can select the rotation tool, click on the item and you can rotate it. And there is one other problem that we sometimes come across. Control Z to undo that. There's one other problem that people sometimes come across, in that you might have created your text first and then your object. So if I delete my object and I decide to create another object and I create it after my text, let's do it here and just move it, you'll see that my text is beneath the object now, and I really need to arrange it so it's above the object. To do this sort of arrangement, you need to go back up to the title menu. And when you go to title, you'll see that you've got something that says arrange, and you can bring to the front or bring back, send to the back or send backwards. So if we just send that one backwards, you can see now I created this item second, but it's pushed behind the text. So these are the basics of the title creation window and how you can create lower thirds. You can do shapes, text on the path. In the next tutorial we're going to look at rolling titles, and then we'll also have a brief look at scrolling titles.